It's a beautiful day in Wyoming. Welcome again to the Crazy Moose, where the projects never end and where you are the most important person here, because without you, it's just not as much fun and not nearly as interesting. This is a well that's been dormant for about 30 to 40 years. It was drilled, the casing installed, but then it was just capped off and never utilized. My assumption is that it just wasn't worth the expense at the time of digging a long trench, laying all the electric line, and laying the pipeline. But now, with solar kits available, we can just drop a pump in there, some pipe, and just run it off some solar panels, and we can just run it right here at the location. Looking at a pump that produces around 3 gallons a minute with a lift of around 120 feet thereabouts, I think a decent entire solar kit should run about $2,000 or maybe even a little bit less. The general idea is to use this primarily for stock watering. So with a float switch and a decent sized water trough, it should do pretty well for stock. When I first started this, just exploring the well to see if it's viable at all, I found a number of videos on YouTube, but a lot of them did not describe the equipment being used, which is one thing I really needed to know. So I'm going to try to cover that just for anybody else who might be interested. The first thing I did was check the static level of the water, the level of the water below the surface. When I pulled the cap off, I could see it was only about 15 feet or so that part was easy. The next step was to try to determine the depth of the well, and I ended up using a construction string and a plumb bob. And doing so, I came up with a reading of approximately 130 feet, subtracting the 15 feet from the surface. I should mention that because there was no pump, no pipe, no electrical lines in the casing, that made it a lot easier for me to determine the depth with a string and a plumb bob. If those components are in the casing, using a string or a related object could get tangled up in those components. So you may want to check with somebody or perhaps try some other method. I used a very general, very simplistic concept for determining the gallons per minute and the recovery rate of this well. I figure I've got a 6-inch casing. The well is roughly 130 feet deep, with that static level being, again, 15 feet below surface. So the recovery back to that static level takes about 40 minutes. So with just some very basic approximation, I approximate that comes out to maybe 3 to 4 gallons per minute. When looking up YouTube videos, I found a lot of people using these toe-behind compressors, generally considered to be 185 CFM. This one says on the outside 49 horsepower. It puts out a consistent 130 pounds PSI, but when the pipe is in the water, it usually runs at around 40 PSI. The hose and the connections, starting with the connections, this is what people refer to as a Chicago connector or a Chicago style connector. You can see there, or Chicago coupler maybe. And in my case, when I got the pipe, this poly pipe, this black pipe, I had to get a couple of fittings to adapt it. So this is 1.25 inch poly pipe, polyethylene, and this is my Chicago adapter, and I just had to get the fittings here to match it up to my 1.25. The pipe is pretty important, so I'll show this best I can. I ended up going with this 1 1/4 poly pipe, black poly. You can see it's 250 psi, and it's listed for PW. I believe that's the potable water code for use for drinking water. I would personally always tie that pipe off to something strong, something that's not going to allow that pipe to come back up out under pressure. Anybody that's going to try doing this, just make sure that you do it safely and check all the components. If you have any questions, definitely check with a professional. There can be a lot of pressure coming out of this stuff, coming out of the pipe, coming out of the fittings off of the air compressor. You might notice there are some safety devices here, you know, to keep the pipes from flying off. And sometimes there's even cotter pins that go through here for safety as well. So I definitely recommend checking with a professional to make sure you have all the proper components and are using them safely and appropriately. I'll shoot just a moment here of inside the casing so you can hear what the recovery sounds like. So now the 40 minutes has passed. The water has recovered and filled back up to the static level. So at this point, I'm just going to turn the compressor back on. I'm going to blow everything out of the casing again. And this time I'm just going to let the compressor run full out for a while, maybe an hour or two at the most, and just try to push out any dirt and silt or whatever's at the bottom. So that's pretty much it for this step until I get the solar kit. If you have any thoughts, ideas, suggestions, if you have any experience, you have any advice, please do comment. Please let me know. I'd love to hear about it. Please remember, if you don't feel qualified or safe in this process, please consult a professional to make sure that you've got everything right. Until next time, peace, stay safe out there, everybody.